Hi, everybody. This is Laura DiMaria. Thank you for joining us for today's Priority-Based Budgeting webinar, which is presented by NASED's newest associate member, ResourceX. So I'm the Executive Director of the National Association for County, Community, and Economic Development. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Fabian, who is ResourceX's co-founder and who will be leading our webinar this afternoon. And you can already see his screen is up there. So before we do, I just want to go over a couple things. So first, all participants are currently in listen mode only. And to ask questions during the presentation, you can type them into the question box, which is located within the GoToMeeting control panel that you should see to your right. And we are also recording this webinar if there's anything you want to follow up about later. So now to make sure that everyone is listening and knows where the question box is in order to ask questions, I'd like to ask everybody if you will, using the little question box area there, let us know where you're calling in from by typing in your city and state. So you should see that little box over to the right. Just let us know where you're calling in from. And we'll give everyone a couple minutes. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you've got some in Seattle, Washington, someone here in DC, Long Beach, California, DuPage County. Hello, Chris. Oregon City, Oregon. All right, great. So that works perfectly. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'd like to give you a little background information on the webinar and on ResourceX before we begin. So at the beginning of 2015, over 80 communities across North America have implemented priority-based budgeting, also known as PBB, impacting over 11 million citizens across the U.S. and Canada. Now, in 2017, over 150 cities, counties, school districts, and special districts will be practicing PBB, priority-based budgeting, using the process and tools to reshape the way all of a community's resources are leveraged to achieve results and inviting citizens further into an authentic role of influence and participation. So to tell us a little bit more about PBB and to get us started at this time, I'd like to introduce Chris Fabian to kick the program off for us. And Chris, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and we're very pleased for the opportunity to make this presentation today, and especially pleased for our partnership with your organization and the chance to meet all of you virtually who are attending. I'm going to make a presentation today about priority-based budgeting and how it's worked in other communities, with some special emphasis on organizations like your own. And at the very end of the session today, I'll also point you to some additional resources, including a webinar that we're putting on this Friday. And I know, as Laura just mentioned, that the session is being recorded today. So that's fantastic to be able to share it. But as Laura mentioned, we are now working with just over 150 organizations across the United States and into Canada, very large organizations like City of San Jose, California, Edmonton, Alberta, Toledo, Ohio, small organizations like Longmont, Colorado, and everywhere in between. And the reason I'm making mention of that is because throughout the years since the creation of priority-based budgeting, we've really been able to test this out in all variety of environments. Priority-based budgeting has been declared a best practice by ICMA, which is the International City and County Management Association, the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, so typically your finance directors in your organization will likely have heard of priority-based budgeting, and also the National League of Cities. So in our collaboration with NASED, we are pleased to bring these tools to you and describe how they're actually working in various communities. I thought it would be helpful as well to lead in with a few points at a high level of why priority-based budgeting is especially relevant in today's environment. As I made mention to begin with, we have found that it's pretty simple. It's replicable and scalable across all types of government entities. And that's important as you're starting to think through, has this been tested in an organization like yours? What happens if you're a smaller organization, or what happens if you're a very large organization? And the principles that we'll go through today have been tested in all variety of environments. The second point there is that, this is quite interesting, when we first started our work, we developed this as practitioners within local government. The principles of priority-based budgeting were actually developed within a county organization. And at the time, back then, 2008, 2009, the very first implementers of priority-based budgeting were using it to survive the Great Recession. And so it can definitely be used when times are tough, which for various reasons that you're well aware of, today's times look potentially interesting from a scarcity standpoint, but it can also be used in times of great abundance as well. As the last few years have shown, many of our communities are not cutting the budget and using priority-based budgeting for that, but instead using priority-based budgeting to allocate new resources, always ensuring that those resources are aligned with the results that they're trying to accomplish. And then finally, that third point, we've seen priority-based budgeting work enterprise-wide for an entire county organization, for an entire city, but we've also seen and had great experiences for organizations that have implemented priority-based budgeting just within one particular area of their organization or a specific department. And so that's important as you're starting to think through whether or not you're a department within a larger organization and you're thinking about bringing priority-based budgeting back home. We've seen it work across the spectrum for all departments participating, and we've also seen it work specifically for one department, because you, for your specific department, you still have to prioritize your own scarce resources as well. So with those three overarching points, I thought I would begin the presentation with some actual examples, some case studies, to give you a sense for how the process ends and why you would get into it, sort of beginning with the end in mind. And I'll start here in Washington County, Wisconsin, where if you're familiar with what's taking place in the state of Wisconsin, this is definitely a pretty tough environment economically, and there's enormous pressure on local government to consolidate services, actually to consolidate all levels of government. You're seeing cities merge together, you're seeing townships seek mergers as well, and priority-based budgeting is definitely an effective tool to help organizations find those key partnerships where you can share services and leverage other stakeholders to find different ways and more efficient ways to provide your programs for less. In Washington County, as you see, they've saved just about $590,000 in their first year in implementing priority-based budgeting, and the way that they've done it, as you see over here on the right-hand side, is through various public-private partnerships as well as public-public partnerships overall. The biggest example being a merger of a health department in their region, all the way down to very small examples like saving $25,000 in the way that they approach their homeless coalition in a partnership now. Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Friends of Abused Families, and the Boys and Girls Club for $5,500. So with your priority-based budgeting work, you will get down to every potential opportunity to find partnerships and leverage those partnerships to create savings. Strathcona County, Alberta is now several years into their priority-based budgeting experience, and they are not in tough economic times. In fact, they are the exact opposite. They have experienced an abundance of new resources overall in their budget, and what they chose to do with priority-based budgeting is actually decrease taxes, believe it or not. And at the same time, the statement that they wanted to make was that not only are they going to decrease taxes, they are increasing service levels. And you think about that for a second, it seems paradoxical. But if you realize, which is what I'll show you here in just a moment, how to use PBB, you can actually decrease service levels in programs that are of a lesser priority and reallocate those resources to your highest priority program levels. And that's exactly how Strathcona has done what I'm describing. They've minimized their approach to lower priority programs, pushed human resources, financial resources towards their highest priority areas. That's how they've increased service levels while decreasing taxes overall. Kalamazoo, Michigan, they are a city organization. And what's kind of fascinating in the Kalamazoo story, just recently, over the last year, they received a philanthropic donation of approximately $70 million. And there were specific strings attached, specific criteria. Number one, they needed to stabilize the city's budget. That was the reason that the grantors provided this donation. And secondly, they needed to end generational poverty. Now in Kalamazoo, they laugh, they say, we don't know which endeavor is harder, ending generational poverty or stabilizing the budget. But the point here being that you can use priority-based budgeting to specifically evaluate certain initiatives against very specific criteria, just like Kalamazoo is doing. For every new initiative that comes forward, they can stipulate the evaluation criteria around which they frame ending generational poverty as well as stabilizing the city's budget. And that's how they are being transparent and accountable back to their the folks who donated the money for their Foundation of Excellence. Now, the city has also done priority-based budgeting across the entire city for all of the evaluation criteria and all of their results, but just wanted to make sure that you see it can be used specifically for certain functions. Douglas County, Nevada, second to last story that I'll share with you as we kick things off. Priority-based budgeting to them was used. Douglas County is a growing region, more or less in the Reno area, and they were finding that they were falling substantially behind on their infrastructure replacement and primarily their need to bolster transportation infrastructure spending. And so they used priority-based budgeting again to reallocate resources away from lower priority programs and lower priority projects to make sure that they were catching up with their infrastructure demands. The point here being, in the process of reallocation, you can focus it on ongoing programmatic issues, and you can also do priority-based budgeting for capital projects. And the last story that I'll share is Boulder, Colorado. The city of Boulder is now 7 years into the process, and what you're seeing down below is a time lapse, and it begins with their quartile spending, quartile 1, 2, 3, and 4, as they began their process. And what you're able to see over the 7 years is how they have focused their spending on their higher priority initiatives, quartile 1 and quartile 2, while mining away $1.7 million from their fourth quartile program areas. And this is extraordinary to be able to see over 7 years that not only has Boulder been able to freeze spending in lower priority program areas, but actually these are people who were dedicated to programs that had less to do with achieving Boulder's results, and financial resources to the tune of $1.7 million, reallocating those to new programs that they wanted to start and enhancements to current programs that they wanted to provide as well. So I'll explain how we get to the quartile system here in just a moment, but this is the mark of progress. This is what you want to be able to accomplish as you implement priority-based budgeting in your organization. So with that beginning sense of why you do it, I did want to spend just a little bit of time describing how it all comes together. How does the process work? And priority-based budgeting is a very simple, straightforward process to evaluate how you are allocating all of your resources to the results that make your organization or community relevant and valued. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about what are those results that you're trying to achieve. What is it that makes you relevant in your community overall? I'll dig into these in just a second and show you real examples. Second, we're going to talk about turning the attention inward towards your organization to find out what is it that you do. What are all of the programs that you offer or services? I'll use those terms interchangeably. And how much does it cost? We're actually going to allocate your line item budget to the programs that you provide and come up with a program budget or a cost for every service that you provide. Third, then, we take the programs that you have identified and they are evaluated relative to the results that you're trying to accomplish, and then we tie in the resource allocation process. So quite simply, we're just answering 3 questions from right to left. Why are we in business? What do we do? And what does it cost us to provide the programs that we offer? Or in priority-based budgeting terms, what are the programs that we offer? How do we allocate the costs to those programs? So we have a direct translation of our budget around programs and services. And how do we evaluate those programs relative to the results that we're trying to achieve? That's the process in its entirety and in its simplicity. So let's get into the details just a little bit. When I talk about programs and services, this is a good example. Many times from the perspective of somebody thinking about PBB, they're wondering, well, what is a program exactly? How deep are we going? And I can assure you we're not going as deep as the line item budget, but we're trying to get down a little bit further than what you might have as your departments or divisions or your typical organizational structure. So here, if we took, for instance, a basic finance department or budget department, the programs that you see here are illustrative of what we come across. A finance department might have an accounts payable function in accounting division, or accounts receivable. Hopefully they have an accounts receivable. An audit coordination, internal controls, payroll processing, a budgeting function, information desk, and pension administration. We're trying to get down to a level of specificity when we talk about programs that we have people who support these things that you do, and that literally at the end of your work, you can decide to take people away from these programs or add people to these programs. A program is just a simple concept for a collection of people providing a certain function overall. So this is just to be illustrative of the level that we're getting into. Now, had you been thinking about doing priority-based budgeting back in 2009, much of this work in creating a program inventory was very labor-intensive. It was very conceptual. We had to work with departments to ask them, what is it that you do? And we would come up with a great list of programs, but it was very hard work. Fast forward 150 organizations later, and the benefit of your timing today is that we have over 50,000 individual programs in our database. We've seen various community development departments. We've seen so many police departments overall. We've seen finance departments and IT departments. So as you start, we can bring you the power of the database to say, here are the programs that you are most likely to offer within your department overall, and it provides your organization a great head start. Now, I say that with a quick caveat. If you've heard of the 80-20 rule before, oftentimes this works to about 80% accuracy as a rule of thumb, with 20% being additional programs that you offer that nobody else has come up with. And that's how departments really get started. Our organizations are unique, and so chances are you are going to offer something within your department that maybe we haven't come across in the database. In Beaumont, Alberta, they had Taco Tuesdays. In Pacifica, California, they had beached whale removal. Those were programs that were totally unique to their organization. Chances are you have unique programs as well. Well, in preparation for this presentation, we actually tapped the database just to see what some of the programs were that we could come across. And we encountered over 2,000 programs in various housing departments, housing authorities, community and economic development departments alone. And chances are there are many more programs that we can take a look at. But think about this for just a second. As you're starting to think through the programs that you provide and how are you going to use this process, this database is absolutely useful. But in addition, as you're starting to wonder, what are other communities doing? What types of programs do they offer that are similar to yours? And can you begin to compare your programs to theirs? How much are they spending? What is their particular resource allocation to their programs? Are theirs being funded? Are they being funded through grant resources? Are they actually being funded through general government tax resources? This is the power of being able to share this information and see what others are actually doing. Well, not only are we coming up with a list of programs that you offer, but we're also tying or translating your line item budget around these programs to create a program budget. So what we do is we actually make a differentiation between your ongoing programs that you want to tie to programs, and we isolate those costs that we're going to go through in the cost allocation, and we differentiate your more one-time costs like capital projects and debt service, anything that we're not going to associate with an ongoing program or service. And those ongoing costs are tied to your program inventory, while your one-time costs can be tied to your capital projects. And so if you're keeping in mind, we will differentiate, or it's a best practice to have your ongoing programs prioritized and ranked against one another, not necessarily combining one-time projects in the mix. One-time projects can be scored and compared relative to themselves as well. But the major point here being everything's going to tie back to your budget overall. So everything that you had in your line item budget will now be expressed as a program cost. Well, changing gears a little bit, we now have program inventory and we have program costs established. I want to get into results and how they are used in the priority-based budgeting process. And what you're seeing here on the screen are just examples of what communities typically cite as the results that make them relevant. Communities will espouse being in business to achieve or have a role in economic vitality. Communities will espouse having a role in providing for a safe community, sustainable and maintained development, effective transportation, the overall health and well-being of their citizens, culture and recreation opportunities, and so on. In fact, we're seeing many communities now cite smart cities as a newer result for why they are in business overall. And you see these in the green-blue color are what we call community-oriented results, and they help us understand why we offer programs and services directly to our citizens. As differentiated from what you see over here on the right-hand side in gold, these are more internal results, and we call them the results of governance, and they are the evaluation criteria against which we're going to score our internal programs. So when we think of results around financial stewardship, or being good stewards of all of our resources, financial, physical, human resources, or providing a high-quality workforce internally, the degree to which our staff are trained and highly performing, or the degree to which we maintain regulatory compliance and stay out of trouble. These are examples of what we call governance results, and they help us evaluate our internal functions that come out of IT, or HR, or fleet, or facilities, or legal, or purchasing overall. And in priority-based budgeting, we make a distinction between community-oriented programs that get scored against community results, while our internal programs are going to get scored against the governance results, the results of internal functions overall. But we don't stop just at the establishment of results. We take one step further with your organization to ask the question, well, what does it mean to actually achieve a safe and secure community? Or how do we know that we're actually accomplishing a successful, healthy local economy or economic vitality? And many of us have gone through exercises like this where we're trying to create performance measures. We're taking a step back to say, what are all of the possible definitions for each one of your results so that we're all crystal clear just how these results are to be accomplished. And the reason that this is really important is when it comes to the evaluation of programs, you want to be able to score your programs or simply communicate how they influence the results that you're trying to achieve. And we have to have a clear set of definitions. We have to have a clear cause and effect theory for how your program actually achieves the results. We see safe and secure community, and we try to help you to identify all the different ways that you define it. Preparing to respond to emergencies or enforcing the law, reducing crime, protecting property, ensuring safe air and access to drinking water, protecting the environment, or providing safe travel and mobility. If I can prove that my program does any number of these things, these key indicators, then I am demonstrating that my program is having a direct influence on this overall result. These are called result definitions. And as we were thinking about you attendees and the types of programs that you offer, one of the breakthroughs that I hope comes through in the presentation is that so many of your programs sometimes get pigeonholed or siloed specifically to the functions that you're providing, when in actuality, as we look across the array of possible result definitions or indicators, it's very clear that the types of programs that you offer impact all of the types of results that we are saying. In safe and secure community, your programs ensure safe housing and property. In effective transportation, utilities, telecommunication infrastructure, that your programs ensure that there's affordable access to the infrastructure in your community. Economic vitality, not only creating new jobs, attracting new businesses, but developing your workforce across your community, or regulating growth, development, and redevelopment. Your programs are ensuring that there are lifelong learning opportunities and that the basic needs of the residents are met from a safety perspective, shelter and housing perspective, food, opportunity to work, and that you're caring for the vulnerable in your community overall. Again, as you're looking at this, what I hope that you're seeing, or what I'm trying to communicate, is that the types of programs that you offer are relevant to all of the types of result areas from a safety perspective, economic perspective, health and well-being of your community perspective, and that is the single biggest breakthrough that we can offer is being able to see your programs within the context of the results that elected officials care so much about. Again, within the database, we can share with you how so many different communities are defining their specific results as we're trying to help you come up with those key indicators for the success of the results in your community overall. Well, let me bring this together and show you how the process comes to completion. Once you have your results defined, there's a scoring process. Scoring is simply communication. We're trying to make the case for every program offered in your organization, how they actually tie to results. And in the first step of scoring, the departments actually go through a self-assessment. So the departments are the providers of the programs. You, as the providers of the programs, know the most about the programs that you're offering. You're the subject matter experts, and therefore it is only appropriate for you to have that first opportunity to communicate, just like I was showing in those result definitions, how your programs actually tie to results. So departments go through scoring every program that they offer against results, and that process is followed by a peer review step. And in peer review, your organization reorganizes around those specific result areas. So you might have a safe community team, an economic vitality team, an effective transportation or health and well-being of citizens team. Oftentimes they are cross-departmental, and the purpose of peer review is to make sure that there is an opportunity for outside eyes to ask questions about your programs. Coming out of peer review, all programs end up with a reconciliation. We're going to run the scores from the departmental perspective. We're going to run the scores from the peer review perspective and basically try to come up with our best understanding of the truth for how all of your programs impact the results that you're trying to achieve so that we can achieve final scores for all of your programs. Let me show something a little bit more concrete. I know this is a little bit of a noisy slide, but it's an example of a program scorecard that's used in that scoring process. So as you see here, this is a public safety department and all of their programs in the inventory, and they are scoring them against each and every one of their results. The scoring scale is pretty straightforward, 0 to 4. 0 means that the program has no influence on the result. A 4 means that the program has a critical influence on the result. So again, scoring is communication. This department is trying to communicate how influential their programs are to each and every one of the results that you're trying to achieve. And as you also might notice, results alone do not account for the full story that we're trying to tell. In addition to results, we came to understand early on that there are other reasons that you provide programs. For instance, maybe your program is mandated. So you might have a program that has nothing to do with achieving results, but you are mandated to provide it. So we want to take that into consideration. You might have programs where your citizens, the users of your programs, are entirely reliant upon you as a service provider, versus other programs where there are plenty of other potential partners. There are other service providers. Maybe they're in the private sector, maybe they're in the public sector. So degree of reliance overall for your programs is another category. Cost recovery for the programs that you are providing. Here we're taking into consideration, is the program funded by another source of revenue besides taxes? Is there a grant coming in, as is the case for so many of your programs that you offer? Are there specific user fees or charges where the users of a program are willing to pay a fee to use it? That's what we're trying to capture in cost recovery. And you see portion of the community served, change in demand. These are additional examples of what we call basic program attributes. And it's the cumulative impact of your programs on the basic program attributes and the results that they are scored against that account for all the reasons why you might offer a program, which is the very definition of program relevance. So every program ends up with a final score. Imagine, if you will, that 100 would mean a perfect score for a program, and 0 would mean that the program scored zeros in every possible program area. So we are able to see every program that you're offering across your department, across the entire organization, and this is how we get to that quartile ranking, just as I was showing in the Boulder example towards the beginning of the presentation. So out here towards the top, we have a host of programs that score really highly. These are just really influential programs relative to your results and your evaluation criteria and your basic program attributes. We call them quartile 1 because they're the most important things that you do, or the most relevant, I should say, relative to the results that you have established as your evaluation criteria. We then have quartile 2 programs, which are also highly relevant. They're just not as relevant as quartile 1. As differentiated from quartile 3 programs, where we're starting to ask questions about the degree of relevance overall. And ultimately, quartile 4 programs, which are demonstrating not total irrelevance, but they certainly have less to do with achieving results overall. So every program ends up in a quartile. A quartile is simply an indicator of the overall program relevance for every program that you offer. And because we have gone through that cost allocation step, we know how much each and every one of these programs costs, so we can graduate to resource allocation as we take a look at our overall spending array and how our resources are allocated to programs at the quartile level. So as you're looking at this particular graphic, this is how it comes together and how we then move into the budget process and to resource reallocation. As you can see here, this organization is demonstrating a fairly healthy spending array. You want to have more of your resources going into quartile 1 and quartile 2 because those are the programs that have the greatest degree of impact on the results that you're trying to achieve. As differentiated from quartile 3 and ultimately quartile 4, where it's not as if these programs are totally irrelevant, but given the opportunity, wouldn't we want to know if we could take the people or the dollars that are dedicated to a program that has less to do with achieving our results and migrate those resources to backfill positions, to add new staff, to start providing new services that are of the utmost priority? Wouldn't we want to know how to do that? And that is fundamentally how we use priority-based budgeting. So I'm going to toggle out of the slides for just a second and actually go into a real example. I'll show you a couple, and I'm going to begin with Douglas County, Nevada. So we were talking about Douglas County and their resource reallocation to infrastructure programs overall. I'm getting reminded that I'm in a webinar, so I'm going to go ahead and quit in my email here. So thanks a lot. Sorry about that. No problem. Okay, so here we are in Douglas County, Nevada. As you can see nearby, Sacramento, Fairfield have also been implementers of the priority-based budgeting process. And we'll get to quartiles here in just a second. But the very first thing I want to demonstrate here in Douglas County, remember that we made that distinction between community-oriented programs and our internal governance functions. And that's one of the very first things that you're able to learn overall is just how your spending is differentiated. Here in Douglas County, we can see of their community-oriented spending, those programs that serve the public directly and were scored against community results, that amounts for about 89% of their overall spending, while internally, for their governance support functions, they're at about 11%. Many PBB communities use these benchmarks to try and understand better how lean can they be for their internal governance programs, and again, really focusing that governance spending on quartile 1 and quartile 2, but trying to always ensure that the slice of the pie is appropriate for community versus governance spending overall. As your policymakers and elected officials get more involved in the process, another thing that we're able to demonstrate within the priority-based budgeting portal is how your programs are aligned with results, how your spending actually impacts the results that you set out to achieve. And so as you see here in Douglas County, you can see this dark blue bar represents their total contribution to public safety or to a safe community. The economic result, this represents how their spending is aligned with programs that scored highly towards the influence of a strong local economy, followed by their infrastructure result, growth and development, and their overall environmental resources. So as we work with elected officials and policymakers from one year to the next, and they take on their typical strategic planning process, or they're thinking about their community vision, or they're looking out towards the long term, our question is, given the resources that you have, is this where you want to be? Are you putting enough towards the safety of your community? If you really are deeply invested in the strength of your local economy, is this enough in terms of your overall spending? And as we drill down, we can actually see all of the various programs that impact these particular results overall. So let's take a result just for example, and we'll look at the economic result. And within the accomplishment of a strong local economy in Douglas County, we can see all the departments who contribute towards the achievement of that particular result. And down below, we can begin to get a sense for what are the actual programs that are contributing to that result overall. So I'll go back to all results, and we'll go ahead and dive into the quartiles here again within Douglas County. So Douglas County is now several years into the process. As you look at their overall spending array, again, this is pretty healthy. It's okay that they don't have as much in quartile 1. The basic dividing line is that between quartile 1 and quartile 2, those are their areas of highest relevance and highest influence on their results. This is where you want to have the greatest majority of your spending overall, again, as differentiated from quartile 3 and overall quartile 4. If we wanted to look specifically at our community-oriented programs, again, they made up just about 89% of the budget, as we saw just a moment ago. We can toggle to look at those internal community programs, and we can also toggle to look at our governance spending overall. And I'll pause just a second here. Very interesting. So just a moment ago, I was talking about how communities are really trying to put pressure on their overall internal governance spending, what we sometimes typically call our overhead spending. But there comes a point of limiting return. In the governance functions, you want to always make sure that you're also understanding that there are quartile 1 and quartile 2 governance functions. They're not all quartile 4 for being internal, even within our support functions with fleet replacement, infrastructure replacement, our IT support and security. We have internal programs that also have everything to do with achieving results. But governance also has primary opportunities to consider resource reallocation, as you see here in quartile 3 and quartile 4. For any of our accounting funds, if we wanted to have a specific discussion just about the general fund, we could do that. So if we're just talking about how we're going to balance our scarce resources within the general fund, we can choose that fund. Or, as many of you have as well, we can pick any of our special revenue funds and talk about the scarce resources within. As I toggle over to look at specific individual departments, this ultimately becomes the most useful for departments as you are making your budget recommendations. So if I looked here at the county sheriff, you see what you probably would have anticipated seeing, and that is that most of the services that they offer end up in quartile 1 and quartile 2, fairly top heavy. And that is because so many of our public safety programs overall actually have an impact on a safe community. Some of their programs impacted their transportation result, the strength of their local economy to the degree that people are moving to Douglas County and feel safe. Many of these programs are mandated overall. So this is not surprising, right, that we would see a public safety agency scoring so highly. But as I toggle and look at a department like community development, we actually see that so many of their programs across the board for their department are scoring even higher than what we just saw within the sheriff's department. So this is totally fascinating for you all. As you're in their community development department, this is most analogous to the types of programs that you see, just how they're organized in Douglas County. But to see so much in quartile 1 and quartile 2, and at least some opportunity areas in quartile 3 and quartile 4, begs a very interesting question. So as we were thinking in terms of preparing for this presentation overall, and clearly in one of my intro slides, I was referencing the NACID email blast that was talking about the upcoming but not yet approved budget, but simply talking about potential threats as we all face to specific grant resources. If I was in your position, you basically are thinking about two primary scenarios. In one scenario where your grant resources are drying up, the question that most local governments are facing is, if the grant dries up completely, do you automatically stop providing the program? And at least in our experience, before priority-based budgeting, If a grant went away, the program went away. And what we were trying to emphasize to our own elected officials is that that's not necessarily the best thing to do. In this case, what I'm portraying is that so many of the programs within community development are actually quartile 1 and quartile 2. And the fact of the matter is, if the grant goes away, why wouldn't we actually take some quartile 4 resources that are devoted to other programs, general government tax dollars, and backfill or subsidize the programs if they are indeed quartile 1 and quartile 2. So that is the reason that you would want to go through this exercise with your entire organization, not necessarily just your department overall, but if you're in Douglas County or you're in your organization and grant resources are not going to be available, how can we reallocate from general government tax dollars that we're currently dedicating to low priority functions and actually support your programs if they're quartile 1 and quartile 2, even if there's no grant dollars to do it. So we see this not only with your programs, but in any type of intergovernmental support overall, and it's kind of a perfect way to use the tools. I talked about 2 scenarios. The second scenario, of course, would be a situation where within your specific agency, the grant resources have dried up and you are in a tough economic situation and you're going to have to reduce the budget overall. You would still use this similar approach to prioritize the scarce resources that you have remaining. So for any particular spending array, it allows you to see how are you going to make your least but best choice, least favorite but most favorable in terms of the resources that are dedicated to results overall. A couple other things I want to show you, and then I do want to take some time to open up the lines for some question and some dialogue. So at the end of our work, the question always becomes, well, how do you start? How do departments really dive into this? And I want to give you just a few clues, and this will tie back to our Washington County, Wisconsin story and all the ways that they determine their public-private partnership. Remember, if you will, that programs were scored not only against the results that they achieved, but programs were also scored against these categories we call basic program attributes. One of the categories was the degree to which a program is mandated. And what I didn't tell you is that there's a sliding scale for that attribute as well. A score of 4 meant that there is a federal or state mandate that requires you to provide a particular program. A 3 might be something in your own incorporation documents or your charter as you got started as an organization. So it's a strong degree of mandate, just not a 4, not a federal or state mandate overall. A 2 might be a local ordinance, a policy that your board has adopted. These are your own self-imposed mandates. It's not coming from a higher level of government. It's coming from your own policies. A score of a 1 would be an industry standard or a best practice overall. We paved the streets in a certain way because the American Society of Civil Engineers said that pavement management maintains and lengthens the lifetime of an asset if you do it a certain way. So best practice is mandate of 1. And a 0 would be no mandate whatsoever. As I filter all the way over here to mandate equals 4, we are now only looking at those programs that are mandated from a higher level of government. And this becomes really interesting. So we go back to the quartile spending. Quartile 1 and quartile 2 and highly mandated. This means not only is the program mandated to a high degree, but it's also achieving results. So these programs, you would want to be providing these even if there was no mandate. They have everything to do with achieving your results. They're highly relevant in your community. But what about these programs that are highly mandated? They scored mandate equals 4, but they're quartile 3 and quartile 4. This means that yes, you're mandated, but they have very little to do with achieving results. You're mandated, but you sure wish that you weren't mandated to provide these programs. And so in our work, we try to guide your organization to study these particular programs, highly mandated, low quartile, for issues of the level of service required to meet the requirement of the mandate. So yes, you're required to do it, but what is the bare minimum level of service that we can provide in order to achieve the mandate just for these low priority programs overall? This is an example of what we call a policy question. And the top 5 areas for resource exploration for your policy questions are the first 5 areas that departments spend the most time on studying their opportunities for resource reallocation. This very first one is it possible that we are over-providing to particular programs that are highly mandated but low relevance? That's policy question number 1. Policy question number 2, let's take not our federally mandated programs, but what about these programs that are mandated because it's our own policy? Perhaps our policies are outdated. We see this all the time, but instead of having the clerk go back and do a total code review or policy review, let's just focus on these programs that are quartile 3 or quartile 4. It's our own self-imposed mandates that are requiring us to provide these programs. What if we changed our own policy? Would that free up our ability to reallocate, in Douglas County's case, over $2.7 million? Policy question 3, actually policy question 3 and 4 are very related, but this is pretty interesting. We now switch focus away from quartile 3 and quartile 4. These are programs that they scored reliance equal to 3. This means that there is another public sector entity who provides this program, and they're actually scoring quartile 1 and quartile 2. So think about this for a second. These programs you care deeply about. They impact your results to a high degree, but it just so happens there's another public sector entity who also provides them. Isn't this a prime opportunity to consider a shared service with that other government entity? That's exactly what Washington County did as they pursued a merged health department. This is what many communities do to find out where their intergovernmental cooperation can take place. Policy question 4, slightly different spin on the issue. It's reliance between 1 and 2, where what we're identifying here are other private sector providers, and in this case we're studying lower priority. So the question on the table is, hey, guess what? There's another private sector service provider. These don't impact our results to a high degree. Can we form a public-private partnership, or is there a chance that we can get out of the business of providing this program altogether? And related, but yet one more step, is policy question number 5. These are programs that scored low in mandate. So if anything, mandate equals 1. That was an industry standard or best practice. So we're not required to provide these programs. Low reliance, somebody else is providing the program as well. They scored low in the quartiles. They're not impacting our results. So think about it. We're not required to do it. Somebody else is doing it. They're not achieving our results. The question here is, are we sure we want to remain in the business of providing these programs? So the policy questions overall guide the departments to their opportunity areas to make progress from one year to the next. We can drill into any of the quartiles to actually see the specific programs, how they scored as we're mining the data and the information. We're able to see from year to year how we are increasing spending in particular quartiles or decreasing spending. Again, this was the mark of progress that we were demonstrating in the city of Boulder, and a variety of analytics where the point here is to not only show you the features of the software, but to show you how you as decision makers can use the tools to be creative in the environment that you're in. So with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and take a pause. We have about 10 minutes left in the presentation, and I wanted to see if there are any questions coming in. I'm going to check my portal over here. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat box. I have, it says to meeting organizers only, or to organizers and panelists overall. If you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box or into the question box, and we'll try to take a few questions here.
Chris, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, especially there towards the end, seeing how all the different components of this work together. And so I have a couple questions while we're waiting for others to submit theirs. And so my first would be, if a department or a county decides to move forward with this and with ResourceX and with PBB, how long should they plan for? How long does that process take?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of overall project implementation, we know that organizations can move through the entirety of priority-based budgeting in as soon as 3 months. typically we advocate that you have approximately a 4-month to 5-month time period that tends to be comfortable. Our approach is that we first and foremost look to see your organization might already have certain elements in place. When it comes to results overall and result definition, some organizations actually have created results that we can directly leverage, and that obviously shortens the overall implementation period. Some organizations have actually come to us. We were just talking with the city of Kansas City, and they had a program inventory that they had been working on, and we can use that information right away. Assuming that you're starting from scratch and you have no information to bring to the table, that's totally okay. But we say, to work your way through those very basic steps of the process, putting together your program costs, we'll gather those costs, allocating the costs to your program inventory, scoring programs against results, putting the model together, and teaching the organization how to implement the work. If we have about a 4-month or 5-month period of time, that tends to be fairly comfortable overall. Our overall approach is to teach your organization how to maintain the data and carry on the process. So we tend to work with a core team. We train the super user along the way, who then trains the departments to update the data from one year to the next and make sure that ultimately all of the departments become masters at not only implementing the process and updating the data, but using the data to make those resource reallocation decisions overall.
Okay. And it looks like we got another question that is very similar to another one that I have for you. So this question is, the quartile 4 funds are obviously much smaller amounts than Q1 and Q2. When you lose a large-scale grant program, could Q4 funds actually keep these programs going long-term? And have you seen this work successfully? That was basically the same question I had. Do you have, so a couple of minutes ago you talked about if you're able to move funds from one place to another when a grant is eliminated or you lose it, whatever the case is. Do you have examples of that having been done successfully, or can you think of a way or an example of how that would apply specifically to our members who, their work is very, very reliant on grants, and several in particular?
Sure. And I'm showing 2 slides from a couple of communities who have gone through this work. And the first here is demonstrating a CDBG Community Development Block Grant program that ended up in quartile 2, and we've seen some quartile 1 programs, some quartile 2, that are demonstrating this level of alignment with the organization's results. And so as we're starting to think through, if these grant dollars really do dry up, that becomes the question. These are very likely to still be funded even if the grant resources are not available. On the other hand, we've also seen organizations where a CDBG program ended up in quartile 4. They didn't define their results as well, and the program in this particular organization, they didn't score it very well. The reason I'm showing you both sides of the equation here is that the benefit of priority-based budgeting for you is going to be making sure that you establish those results clearly from the beginning and define them to your benefit, and then ensure that scoring takes place so that it's clear, just like we were demonstrating in these result definition maps, that your programs are scored appropriately. If you get to the end of the process and your program is ending up in quartile 1 and quartile 2, it's because you've made your case just like we were demonstrating here, and as it should be, that the programs are highly relevant to those results overall. If we don't make that case, then there's little likelihood that the program would actually see the funding continued. Our examples, not only from CDBG programs, but from many different programs where state government funding has dried up, where federal funding has dried up, we've seen most communities are able to make their case, if their program is a high priority, that they should continue them even if the grant revenues are no longer available.
Okay, got it, yeah. All right, do we have any other questions from anyone on the call? I'm not seeing any come in. Before we totally close, though, I did want to mention that, so we're very excited because ResourceX will be at our annual meeting in Portland later this year. So you guys will have an exhibit space, you'll have a breakout session, everyone will have a chance to meet you then. I know, Chris, are you excited about that? Looking forward to meeting all of our members out later this year in September.
We're thrilled about it. This to us is it's a challenging problem that your members are facing, and we've seen it so many times. The problem is there's a mindset that we only do a program if there's grant resources available, and that is a very limited perspective on whether or not your program should continue. If we can help to broaden that conversation, that the programs and services that are offered from your members actually have tremendous alignment to the results that communities care about, it's a game changer for elected officials and policymakers to make sure that these programs are funded. And it's, when I say game changer, it's such a buzzword, what I mean by that is that typically we're all fighting for that piece of the pie that is shrinking more and more. And this changes that conversation, that you're not just fighting for the shrinking piece of the pie, you're actually demonstrating how your programs relate to results. So we're thrilled with the partnership with NACED, and we're very excited to meet more of your members in person and share more experiences. Quickly to that end, we're hosting another quick webinar this Friday, and it's just to help show how some of the beginning information is put together. If you're interested or bringing others from your team, just shoot an email to helpdesk@ResourceX, as you see there on the screen, and we'll make sure that you get registered for that. But thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah, of course. And what you're saying really aligns with a lot of the conversations we're having with all of our members, and particularly just, within our staff here pretty much every single day, about how important it is to be able to tell the story of what your programs are doing, and in this case specifically how the funding is being used in your community and showing demonstrable results, and that's really what it all comes down to. So thank you very much. This was really informative, and we're definitely excited to have you come out in Portland later this year. And everyone on the call throughout the year, we'll be hearing more from ResourceX, as well as all of our associate members. And thank you, Chris, and to your team for supporting NACED as well. And we're very excited to have you guys on board as new members in this year. So thank you, everybody, for participating on the webinar today. If you've got any questions for us or for Chris, just feel free to reach out. And thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks very much.